Welcome to Whole Bible Study with your host, Tad Inoue. As we come to Numbers chapter 18, it helps to pause and remember where we are in the story so far. Israel has been delivered from Egypt, brought through the waters of the Red Sea, and gathered at Mount Sinai, where the covenant was established. The law was given, and the tabernacle was built as the place where God's presence would dwell in the midst of the people. From that point forward, the life of Israel begins to organize itself around the tabernacle. In the opening chapters of Numbers, the tribes are counted and arranged in an orderly camp around the sanctuary. The Levites are set apart for the service connected to the tabernacle, and within the tribe of Levi, the family of Aaron is appointed to the priesthood. Aaron and his sons are responsible for the altar, the sacrifices, and the most sacred duties connected to worship. But as the wilderness journey continues, tensions begin to surface. Israel is still learning what it means to live as a covenant people, and that process includes moments of conflict and confusion. One of the most dramatic examples appears just before this chapter in the rebellion of Korah. Korah himself was a Levite. Along with other leaders in the community, he arranged the leadership of Moses and Aaron. His argument was essentially this: if the whole community is holy, then why should Aaron and his sons hold a unique priestly role alone? The rebellion raised a serious question about authority and about who had the right to approach the sanctuary. The outcome of that rebellion was severe. The narrative describes divine judgment falling on the rebels, followed by a plague that spreads through the camp. In the middle of that crisis, Aaron stands between the living and the dead with incense, and the plague stops. Then, in the next chapter, God provides a clear sign regarding the priesthood. Each tribal leader places a staff before the Lord, and Aaron's staff alone miraculously buds and produces almond blossoms. The message is unmistakable. Aaron's priesthood has been chosen. Now, Numbers chapter 18 comes immediately after those events. In many ways, it answers the question that the rebellion raised. If Aaron and his sons truly are responsible for the priesthood, what does that responsibility actually look like? What are their duties? And what are the boundaries of their work? And how are the Levites involved in supporting that role? The chapter begins with God speaking directly to Aaron. This is significant because many places in the Torah, the instructions are addressed to Moses. Here, the focus shifts specifically to Aaron and the priesthood. Aaron and his sons are told that they will bear responsibility for the sanctuary and for the priesthood itself. The Hebrew verb here used comes from the root nasa, which means to carry or to bear. In other words, the priesthood is not only a position of honor, it is also a burden of responsibility. Those who serve closest to the sanctuary carry the responsibility for how those sacred spaces are handled. Jewish interpreters have often emphasized this aspect of the priesthood. In the rabbinic tradition, the priest is not primarily a figure of privilege, but one of duty. Mishnah and Talmudic discussions about temple service frequently highlight the seriousness of approaching holy things in the correct way. The priest stands at a boundary. His work helps maintain the distinction between what is holy and what is ordinary. That distinction is a major theme throughout the Torah. The Hebrew word for holy is qodesh. The basic meaning of that word is set apart. Holiness does not simply refer to moral goodness. It refers to something that has been designated for a special relationship with God. In the world of the tabernacle, certain objects, places, and activities are considered holy because they are set apart for divine service. The altar, the sacrificial offerings, the sacred vessels, and the inner spaces of the sanctuary all belong to that category. The priesthood exists to care for those holy things and to ensure that they are handled properly. Numbers 18 also explains the role of the Levites in relation to the priests. The Levites assist with the work of the tabernacle, but they do not perform the central priestly functions that belong to Aaron and his sons. Instead, they support the systems by guarding the sanctuary and helping with its operation. The text describes the Levites as being, quote, given to Aaron. The Hebrew expression emphasizes this idea strongly. The Levites are described as netunim, which can be translated literally as given. The repetition is the way of stressing that the Levites themselves are a gift entrusted to the priesthood for the service of the sanctuary. This layered system of responsibility reflects the structure of the tabernacle itself. The sanctuary is arranged in zones of increasing holiness. The outer court is accessible to the people bringing sacrifices. The inner areas are restricted to the priests. And the most sacred space, the Holy of Holies, is entered only by the high priest on the Day of Atonement. Scholars such as Jacob Milgrom have pointed out that this structure creates what might be called concentric levels of holiness. The closer one moves towards the center, the greater the degree of sacredness, the greater the care required in approaching that space. From a historical perspective, this kind of structure was not unusual in the ancient Near East. Temples in surrounding cultures also had priestly classes and carefully defined ritual roles. However, the system in Israel had a distinctive feature. The tabernacle was not attached to a palace or a royal city. It traveled with the people. The presence of God was not confined to a capital, but it moved with the community through the wilderness. Another major focus of Numbers 18 is the way the priests and the Levites are supported. Unlike the other tribes, the Levites do not receive a territorial inheritance in the land. Instead, their inheritance is described as the Lord himself and the offerings brought to the sanctuary. This is where the practice of tithe becomes central. Hebrew word for tithe is ma'asir, which simply means a tenth. The people bring a tenth of their produce and livestock as an offering connected to the worship of God. That portion is given to the Levites as their provision. The Levites, in turn, are instructed to offer a portion of that tithe to the priests. The offering is sometimes called the tithe of the tithe. The idea is that everyone involved in the sacred system participates in giving. Even those who receive support from the offering still acknowledge God by giving a portion back. Rabbinic tradition later developed extensive discussions about these practices. The Mishnah includes entire tractates devoted to the details of tithing and agricultural offerings. Those discussions reflect how seriously Jewish communities took the instructions found in passages like Numbers 18. From the perspective of modern biblical scholarship, many researchers see this chapter as a part of what is often called the priestly material of the Torah. Scholars such as Jacob Milgrom and others have noted that these sections of the text place strong emphasis on ritual order, sacred space, and the responsibilities of priesthood. These traditions likely developed within communities connected to temple worship and were preserved as a part of Israel's sacred writings. Now, at the same time, the theological message of the chapter goes beyond administrative details. Numbers 18 shows how an entire community can organize its life around the presence of God. The priests, the Levites, and the people all have roles to play. The system only works when each group accepts its responsibility. The rebellion of Korah challenged that order. Numbers 18 responds by clarifying it. The priesthood is not presented as a prize to be seized. It is a calling that carries weight and accountability. The Levites assist in that calling, and the people participate by supporting the work of the sanctuary through their offerings. Now, for readers today, this chapter can seem distant because The structures it describes belong to an ancient world very different from our own. Yet the underlying ideas remain important. The text speaks about responsibility and spiritual leadership, about the careful handling of sacred things, and about the role of community in sustained worship. With Christian interpretation, later writers often looked back at these priestly structures when reflecting on the meaning of the spiritual service. The New Testament letter to the Hebrews, for example, draws on that imagery of priesthood and sanctuary when speaking about the work of Jesus. Early Christian thinkers such as Origen of Alexandria and Gregory of Nyssa also reflect on that symbolism of sanctuary and the priesthood as ways of describing humanity's relationship with God. At the same time, the Jewish tradition has continued to read passages like Numbers 18 with the broader text of Torah observance and the history of the temple. Scholars such as James E. Vanderkam and George W. E. Nicholsberg have shown how priestly themes remained central in Second Temple Judaism and many Jewish writings from that period. What we see in Numbers 18, then, is a moment where the wilderness community pauses to clarify how sacred life will function. After the crisis of rebellion, the text turns to structure and responsibility. It reminds Israel that worship is not simply spontaneous expression. It is a shared system of practices that protects and honors the presence of God among the people. So as we read this chapter in the context of the larger story of the Bible, we can clearly see that it plays a role in shaping how Israel understands holiness, leadership, and the community life around the sanctuary. Well, thank you for joining me today for this deep dive into Scripture, and I look forward to seeing you in the next chapter.